And then get to January after this has gone on, and we had gone to the funeral and the services there,
Mm-hmm.
and then stayed up with family for about a week, maybe a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more, maybe a little less. And I came back and just wasn't feeling good, and just wasn't feeling like I was getting. He felt like I had gotten some sort of a bug of some sort. Had gone to the doctor, went on kind of a round of antibiotics. Still wasn't feeling any better. I went back to my doctor and said, I think there's something more going on here. Not exactly sure what, but it still feels like there's something else going on. So she went ahead and did a full kind of blood panel to figure out what was going on, and found out that my thyroid wasn't functioning properly, and said, from her initial, what she could initially see in the blood work, that it looked like it was Graves' disease, which is, for people that don't know, is just an overactive thyroid. So essentially, my thyroid was producing too much hormone. So everything, my metabolism, heart rate, everything like that was hyped up just because of all of this extra hormone production that's going on. And with that, I was losing weight, which, who doesn't want to lose weight after the holidays? I mean, but it was probably about 15 pounds pretty quickly within a month, I would say. And started doing the research on it, and got pretty nervous about it, just because anything that goes on with your thyroid can be pretty life altering, if you have either like hypothyroid, so your thyroid's functioning too much, it's functioning too little. The problem with like an overactive thyroid is that a lot of times with that typically means that if they're not able to control it with a medication, then they're going to either have to remove your thyroid surgically, or they'll do this radiation therapy that will essentially kill the thyroid. And the negative side of that is that you immediately develop then like an underproducing thyroid, because you no longer have one. So you're pretty much on some sort of a synthetic hormone for the rest of your life. And anybody who's ever heard of Hashimoto's disease, that's underactive thyroid, which brings with it another set of problems. So all in all, it was looking at the potential of having a year or more of kind of recovering from all of those different thyroid issues. Of course, I'm really good at catastrophizing. So of course, everybody should just steer clear of WebMD to some degree, even if your doctor does tell you things about what might be going on medically, because sometimes that can just make it worse. But nervous about that, and was dealing with a lot of those things too at the beginning of 2016 then.
Yeah, I remember you were a bit of a mess,
Mm-hmm.
frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like, to you, it felt like a death sentence. I know you already admitted to catastrophizing, but
Mm-hmm.
like for folks to just understand your mental state,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really felt like you felt like your life was in jeopardy.
I think there were some of those feelings, and I think because, and as I'll talk about, throughout Recovery Rebels and things like that, with how much of an important piece running is in my recovery, and just dealing with a lot of the mental health concerns and things like that. Looking at the fact that I probably wasn't going to be able to run for quite a while, just realistically, because
If they had to take the thyroid out.
even if they didn't have to take the thyroid out, there was still, with that extra hormone production and things like that, if they couldn't control it with medication, it causes your heart rate to go so fast.
Right.
You really have to limit, and can't really do a lot of exercise with it.
Right. So regardless of whether it had to come out or not, if the medication didn't work,
Mm-hmm.
then one of your major coping skills would be lost.
Right, and it wasn't even so much about like the type of exercise or the type of ways of staying active. It was just not being able to do that because it could risk having some heart issues with it.
Right. So then a little later in the year, we're in spring of 2016, and the consultation work that I had begun the beginning of the in the spring of the previous year, that was all still going on, and it kind of reached a point where some major initiatives got implemented, and frankly weren't necessarily the most popular, and I can understand why. Though they were being implemented to try and help everyone to transition into things that were going to be very difficult, things that I know now are starting to become more of a lived reality. But when you're a good year away from it, it's hard to know that, and it's hard to see that. And so, yeah, I was in a position where I was fielding a lot of complaints from staff, from customers, just with being the manager over a large team and handling any complaints that went up the chain from that group, and then also fielding things that were concerns over the different initiatives that were implemented. Just was the point person for a lot of complaints. And like I mentioned before, I had previously been in this wonderful state of mind where it was every mistake or complaint is just another opportunity to learn, grow, and excel. But frankly, I was pretty broken down from the events at the end of 2015, and I don't know how much I was interested in learning, growing, or excelling. I was heading toward survival mode. And I do think I started to take some of the stuff personally. And there were a couple times where there were a couple things that were said to me that were personal, which was hard too, because, you're there just trying to do your job. And when people start to say things that, making judgments about your motives, and that that's not fun. And to have that on top of what had happened with the LLG asking us to leave, I really got to the point where I just felt very isolated and very rejected. I didn't feel like, other than the hubs, because we are a team.
Yeah.
We are. And I could not be more thankful for that. But yeah, it's like I didn't feel like, outside of my most immediate family and a few close friends, I was feeling very much alone and very much just not wanted. And that was really hard. Got to June of 2016 and started having some interesting health issues. Was at work, had a difficult meeting, ended up calling in the next day because I just was not processing things well cognitively. Went through that weekend essentially unable to speak. I could form sentences if I really tried hard, but boy was it hard. And most of it I just couldn't talk. I just couldn't talk. And when I would try to speak about it, only the most basic sentences would come out because that was all I could get out. If I remember right, that was end of June, beginning of July. And then it was in July that I got to the point at the end of July where I'm standing in the hall talking with my supervisor, and all of a sudden I just felt like I was on a boat that was on wild seas and just felt really unsteady on my feet. And I kind of ran for the closest chair and sat down, and within an hour or so, ended up calling you and saying, come get me. Because it just wouldn't stop. This kind of almost tipsy feeling. And then the next day, I said, hey, Brett, would you take me into work? Because I don't know what that was yesterday, and if that happens again, I don't want to have to... Because we had to call the parents, have them come get the car, and all that kind of stuff. I was like, well, let's just avoid that. Why don't you take me into work? And we were in the car on the way to work, and even though I wasn't standing up, I could feel it in the car. Just this sense of I don't want to say dizzy, because it's not the same as being dizzy. It's similar, but it's not the same. It's not like vertigo. But very much a tipsy feeling and like you're on a boat. And I had Brett take me home, and I called into work, and I don't think I ever ended up getting back to work after that.
I don't think you did. I think it was
so.
Pretty much then when the cacophony of doctors and all of those things came together.
Yeah. Spent about 2 months or so trying to get a diagnosis. Trying to find out what in the world I had. Why was I feeling this near constant feeling of like I was on a boat, and having spells where I could not even talk properly. Strange gibberish would come out of my mouth, or just the wrong words would come out of my mouth. Definitely not being able to walk properly. Kind of walking into walls. A lot of the time I would veer left, like, oh, you know, and and feeling nauseous. Oh my goodness, the most horrible nausea, and this feeling of heat, this evil feeling of heat, and just couldn't figure out what in the world this was. And of course my family thinks I'm dying, and every test is coming back, no, her heart is perfectly healthy, no, her brain is perfectly healthy, it's all of this, she's fine. And one of the doctors was so sweet, because he's like, I know there's something, I just have no idea what. Until finally, I had a tilt table test. And that test was very conclusive. In a tilt table test, they put you on this table, and then they start to, put you up, and they stop at like this angle, where you're not perfectly standing up, but you're just kind of tilted back. And if you have the condition that I have, it will, within 40 minutes, show that you'll start to have a reaction where you get all these symptoms and some more. In my case, I was on the tilt table, and I started to have the nausea and the heat, and had that whole feeling like I was on a boat. And then all of a sudden my hearing started to go, and I started to have kind of like the fuzz on TV, the black and white, old school fuzz on TV. I started to have that coming across my field of vision, and I found out later what was happening was that my heart rate had gone down to 40, and my blood pressure had tanked, and I was about to pass out. And in fact, this whole time, for these months while this had been going on, that's actually what was happening. Was I was in what's called pre-syncope, where syncope means fainting, and the condition is neuro, which is brain, neuro, cardiogenic, heart, syncope, fainting. And what it means is that fluid, for whatever reason, they don't know why, fluid likes to pool in my lower extremities, and that causes my heart to race, and then my brain says, wow, that heart is going so fast, and it says, we need to slow that heart down, and it completely overcompensates, and that's when the heart rate and BP start to tank out, and I start to go down. I've never actually fainted. I've always been able to catch it. If you go lay down, you can make it stop. Now, sometimes it takes hours and hours and hours to get those feelings to go away. Sometimes it's just like a half hour, and I'm fine.